Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here's your host, Joe Kuzma.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. My name is Joe Kuzma, and today we have even more special NFL draft content. That's right, the content. It's here. Hashtag NFL draft. Man, folks, I don't know how else to tell this to you. I'm truly humbled and definitely feel privileged to have on our special guest for this particular show. The credentials just speak for themselves. Leigh Steinberg, premier sports agent, entrepreneur, best-selling author, and CEO of Leigh Steinberg Sports and Entertainment Holdings, is best known for his work building athletes into standalone brands and is often credited as the real-life inspiration for the Oscar-winning film Jerry Maguire. Leigh has represented many of the most successful athletes and coaches in football, basketball, baseball, hockey, boxing, and golf, including the number one overall pick in the NFL draft for an unprecedented 8 times, in conjunction with 62 total first-round picks and a record 12 Hall of Famers. With an unrivaled history of record-setting contracts, Leigh has secured over $4 billion for his 300-plus pro athlete clients, directed more than $750 million to various charities around the world, and over the course of his career, Leigh has been featured on numerous national television programs, including 60 Minutes, Larry King Live, The Today Show, Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous, and many more. And now he joins us here on the Steel City Underground podcast. Without further ado, I give the floor to the legendary, I hope I'm okay with saying legendary, Leigh Steinberg. I know I asked this already, Mr. Steinberg. Is it okay if I call you Leigh? How are you doing, Leigh?
I'm doing great.
And I was just mentioning off air, I wasn't aware of the Jerry Maguire tie-in, but you've got this really cool photo that's sitting right behind you on your desk. We got to get that in the frame. That's awesome. That's awesome. And I have to admit too, I love the garden gnome. Got the garden gnome, got the Steelers stuff here. One sitting right behind me as well. So without digging right into it here, NFL draft. I was mentioning it is like Christmas morning, and or almost Christmas morning. It is the night before Christmas, and we are restless. There are noises all throughout the house. And there might be even more noise this year than any other year. Being in the position that you're in, this has got to be one of the more, for me, it seems like it's so unpredictable, such a chaotic offseason. And the NFL draft, it doesn't seem like there's any clear path of what's going on. What are some of your insights into this?
Well, first of all, I love draft night. This will be my 48th draft. I started back in 1975. And what you have is a young man who's worked his whole life since Pop Warner football with self-discipline and purpose, and generally they're surrounded by every person close to them in their life. So the family's been part of this, the coaches from high school, the pastor, and time ratchets up so that draft time, the time in between picks, is not real time, it's water torture time. Every second seems like a minute, every minute seems like an hour, and it all gets more and more tense until a player gets picked, and it breaks out in this rhapsodic joy and ecstasy. So it's really a tremendous amount of fun when it finally comes through. This draft, I think, is going to be a meat and potatoes draft, as opposed to the glamour-filled drafts we've had the last couple of years, loaded with quarterbacks and skill position players. There probably are 2 quarterbacks that will go in the first round, but probably not in the top 10 picks. Now, they get pushed up because they're quarterbacks, because the need for a franchise quarterback is so dire now that a team cannot win in contemporary football, get to the Super Bowl without someone that they can build around for 10 to 12 years, who they win because of rather than with, and who, importantly, in critical situations can compartmentalize, adopt a quiet mind, and elevate their level of play to take a team to and through victory. Um, so I'm guessing the first pick will be a defensive lineman, and probably the second pick might be a linebacker. And then you're going to have a couple big offensive linemen, probably three of them go, and then a defensive back, and that will be the run of it. So this is the sort of draft the teams have to do to make their infrastructure strong to support them, but it's not necessarily the fans' delight.
And it's funny that you say the fans' delight, because we have a couple of hosts or co-hosts here on our platform that are former offensive linemen. And we always talk about how important offensive linemen are, but it's not always the sexiest pick when the fans are looking at it, but it is definitely crucial to the success of different teams. And I find it very interesting what you just said about perhaps we could have a whole bunch of defensive players at the very front of this draft, and a quarterback may come and fall right down. Obviously, this is a Steelers platform that we operate on. So we're here and we're looking at pick 20 overall and wondering if one of these young men, one of these prospects, maybe a potential future successor for the retiring Ben Roethlisberger, ends up at pick 20, or perhaps, I mean, I'm going to ask this anyways and get your feel for draft day trades. There is a chance, maybe a lot of people speculating, the Steelers may have to move up in order to make that happen, instead of, the traditional just kind of wait and let the draft come to them, like last year, pick 22 with Najee Harris. And that's kind of where I want to go. Is there's a couple of different angles here. There's teams that may be looking for a quarterback, but I guess, is it that the quarterback class maybe, a lot of people are saying it's weak or not as strong as in previous seasons? Is that maybe one of the reasons that it's going to be a little more heavier with some of the other positions that you mentioned?
Absolutely. So last year, if you look, there were 5 or 6 first-round quarterbacks that moved immediately, many of them into starting roles for the Jets, for the Patriots. You had a whole series of them. The last 3-4 years of drafts have been chock full, and they've sort of rebuilt, but there's still teams who need them. And so whether or not Pittsburgh decides to draft a quarterback, if they want one, they're going to have to assess whether there are other teams they think will take the player they covet before pick 20. And if they will, then that's where they have to get involved with swapping draft picks with the team higher in order. And the question is, can they precisely calculate where that is? So back in 2017, our client Patrick Mahomes got traded for by a team that moved up from like the 20s to the 10th pick, and the Chiefs knew exactly where to go. So much of this, Steelers are a great organization, and they probably have had their feelers out to figure out who else probably goes here. I mean, I was a designated representative of Steeler quarterbacks for a number of years. I had Neil O'Donnell, and then after that, Cordell Stewart, and then the early years of Ben Roethlisberger before I took a break. And Ben's situation was one in which it looked like the trade between San Diego and New York, which would swap Phillip Rivers for Eli Manning, wasn't going to go through, and the Giants were going to pick Ben. So I keep telling Ben that day, no, I'm pretty sure that New York covets Manning, and the Chargers worked with Phillip Rivers at the Senior Bowl, so I'm sure that the trade's going to happen. But we go 14 minutes and 56 seconds with the general manager having called Ben's college coach and said, if that trade's not up by the time that we pick, we're going to pick Ben. And of course, it didn't happen, and that a marriage made in heaven occurred because Ben was available for Pittsburgh to take him, and I can't imagine a better fit for him.
Absolutely. And you saw the send off. I mean, totally beloved. Have you ever seen a send off like that for a player? I mean, it's very rare. The home send off for Ben Roethlisberger. I mean, it was pretty surreal. Have you ever experienced anything like that in your lifetime, or seen anything like that with an athlete?
But likewise, you've rarely ever had a player who played 18 years for one team and never had a losing season. And so just imagine 18 years and being for the same team. Many quarterbacks have to end their career somewhere else. Even Tom Brady's ending up at Tampa Bay. You saw, a series of swaps. Russell Wilson's not going to end up with Seattle. He's with Denver. Carson Wentz just went to Washington. Matt Ryan didn't end his career with the Falcons. He's going off to Indianapolis. So this is a fairly unique and iconic tenure that Ben had with the Steelers. And they're one of those franchises that, because they're so sound ownership-wise with the Rooney family and so sound in the front office and so experienced, and they've had the same great coach for years, that they defy the traditional concept that people under parity have to go up in stature, have a good run of 3 or 4 years, and come back down and rebuild. They never really had to rebuild because they're qualitatively so superior in how they run the organization.
Well, we hope that continues. It's been a nice run. 2003, the last time they were below 500. And of course, Ben Roethlisberger, the 11th overall pick in the 2004 draft. So yes, a very, very long tenure with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And Lee, I try not to think about 18. You said 18 years. I'm about the same age as Ben Roethlisberger. I turned 40 at the end of last year, and I'm like, wow, has it really been that long? I remember when he was a rookie and getting his rookie jersey, but I also have an 8-year-old daughter, so I try not to think about the number 18. I'm like, that's only 10 years away. It's absolutely wild. But anyways, yeah, speaking to the unpredictability and speaking about quarterback classes, quarterback driven league, I'm thinking though, does this benefit the Pittsburgh Steelers? Are they going to be able, I mentioned just a little bit ago, can they let the draft come to them at 20? I'm in the personal opinion that maybe they can't, because there's maybe a few teams, not only that are already in position in front of them, that might take a quarterback that's on their board, but there might be another team behind them that tries to move up, much in the similar manner that you mentioned a few years ago with the Kansas City Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes.
Take a look at the Carolina Panthers. They seem to be in the market for a quarterback. Maybe the New Orleans Saints. But other teams may decide that the pickings are pretty slim and wait till next year when Ohio State's got a quarterback, Alabama's got a quarterback. That class already looks much more talented. But we're just talking about the draft. Either of these two players, or it could be Matt Corral, could end up being great franchise quarterbacks. You don't know. They're just not as highly touted and highly rated as the quarterbacks have been over these last years. I mean, there was a player from Clemson that was going to be the first pick in the draft probably when he was born. And so they may take it up. But again, Pittsburgh's got really good intel, and if they have decided they want one of these quarterbacks, look, it's one thing to draft them, then you have to have the care and feeding of the quarterback. Do you want them to sit behind a talented veteran or aging veteran for a year like Mahomes and Aaron Rodgers and Carson Palmer and Phillip Rivers did? Do you want them to start right away? Remember, Ben was not scheduled to start his rookie year. It was only the injury to Tommy Maddox that set Ben off on winning all his rookie games. It was totally not predicted that he would be the starter. So the next phase of this is how you bring along the young quarterback. How early you have him start, if you have him start, because the only way they get better is seeing the field more times. But the problem is that an inexperienced quarterback may throw interceptions he's never going to throw again, call timeout at the wrong time, and do some things until they get used to the field. So you have to prepare your fans, if you're going to start a young quarterback, for the fact that you're not seeing a finished product, and get people to be safe and tolerant. He also needs the right supporting cast. How is your offensive line? What are your receivers like? Do you have a running game? All of which Pittsburgh has. So there's debate as to how fast to start the players. And you saw last year, there were a series of quarterbacks. I mean, Joe Burrow the year before went right in. Zach Wilson this year, Mac Jones, they went right in and started from the start. But they're going to have misadventures. So if you want to get to the next franchise quarterback, there needs to be some patience.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I was actually going to bring that up. Is that part of like the situation here with this this quarterback class? Because we've been talking quite a bit, not only here, but hearing it everywhere else. Anyone who has an opinion is saying, well, just wait till next year. But you don't always know if next year you're going to be in a position, because you look at the previous years, you look at what some of the teams have given up. 49ers last year in order to move up and get Trey Lance. Those type of situations, the Carson Wentz and Jared Goffs with the Rams and the Eagles. And this might be a unique situation where, if you wanted a quarterback this year, does it sound like you're of the opinion there maybe isn't a consensus number one, but there's enough talent perhaps that could be developed if they're in the right situation, rather than like last year, you just mentioned, Zach Wilson or Mac Jones just coming in and being like a week one starter.
Right. And Trey Lance did not play much last year. So you've got different paths that you're going here. I am sure the Steelers have assessed the talent of all two or three quarterbacks in this draft. And what the draft is not a merit badge for great college performance. It's a projection as to how the player will be for the next 10 to 12 years. So they're having to project what they think will happen in terms of maturity. So looking at all the classic questions, how accurate is this? How accurate is he? How strong an arm does he have? How much mobility does he have? How bright is he? What are his reads like? They're going through all that thought, and it's always a projection. And you also want to project how he fits into Pittsburgh's offense, which is different than other offenses, at times much more run-oriented, and how that will happen. But it's tomorrow night. They've already made this judgment. We don't know. Generally, you can't listen to anything that personnel say during this week. There's a generalized amnesty for being misleading. Matter of fact, it's not considered a venial sin. So if a general manager died and went up to St. Peter, and St. Peter said, well, what was the worst sin you ever committed in your lifetime? And the general manager said, I misled people publicly about the draft. St. Peter would say, come right in.
I mean, you took the words out of my mouth. I was going to say, April starts with April Fool's Day, but it feels like it just continues on through to the NFL draft. And
why would a team, in heaven's name, especially one that might be trying to gauge where they need to move to, be signaling to other teams publicly what their intentions are? They want to be able to maneuver on that board the way they will without anyone having the slightest idea what they're doing.
Yeah, and I have like that similar story. The year the Steelers took TJ Watt, they were very much in love with a player from my alma mater at Youngstown State. His name was Derek Rivers. He ended up going in the third round, but we kind of felt, hey, just as much as the Steelers have spent time, I had this love affair with Derek Rivers as an edge rusher, and they need edge rusher. We thought Derek was the pick, and then it ended up being TJ Watt. And we see how that worked out a lot differently than maybe some may have guessed, especially falling down as far as he did in the draft. But that's where I'm kind of getting to also. I mean, are the Steelers really showing their hand at quarterback, or some of the other teams showing their hand at quarterback, or not showing their hand at quarterback? Could we have a surprise coming up here tomorrow night and see maybe is it just a smokescreen for another position, or what other teams are kind of playing the shenanigans here?
So I don't think you can necessarily trust any projections that you see, although there are certain writers and certain groups that are well educated on football, and they're making an educated guess. But that's different than, of course, what you're suggesting can happen, because teams are, again, not revealing what they're really going to do, and they don't want anyone else to know. So they may have a coveted player who we're not aware of, but the last thing in the world they want to do is flag that to competitive teams. So anything really can happen. It's and just remember this: quarterbacks traditionally in the first round get pushed up beyond their rating number. If you look at the final rating that someone has of a quarterback and compare that to an offensive lineman or defensive back, they may be at the same number, or the position player may be higher ranked. But that doesn't mean that a team will necessarily take them, because the premium, this has become such a passing game that the premium on that one trigger guy, I mean, if you look at it and you look at the AFC, I mean, it's Patrick Mahomes and Russell Wilson and Josh Allen and Joe Burrow and
It's terrifying from my seat.
so the point is, you're sitting in the same division as this brilliant young quarterback Joe Burrow, and all of a sudden, and then you just had Cleveland. No one's ever doubted Deshaun Watson's ability as a franchise quarterback. He had off the field issues, but all of a sudden the Cleveland Browns have a quarterback that's a big winner on the field, and you start to look around and, oh my goodness, it's a little bit scary.
Yeah. And Lamar Jackson having won an MVP as well.
Just him.
Oh yeah, just Lamar Jackson.
Think about that: Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Deshaun Watson. Somehow you might want to keep pace.
Yeah. Does that mean that they have to take a quarterback in the first round, though? You had mentioned maybe one or two.
Groups. I mean, you could take someone lower. Nothing predicts as well as taking. Remember, the first round quarterbacks that go don't all make it. So it's picking the right player. If you don't think there's someone with that high ceiling of talent, then you're better off not doing it, because you saw a number of teams traded for starters. This deck will continue to reshuffle. So you're not going to take that player out of desperation. One thing that has always been a hallmark of the Steelers is that they don't act out of desperation or dire need. They have a long view of all this, and it's made them unique. I remember one day I was talking to Dan Rooney, and the question was how fast Ben Roethlisberger in his early years, he had an injury, how fast would he come back? And what Dan said to me is, if we lose a game or two or three, if we even lose the season, we're not rushing him back in a way that may permanently stultify his career. So they look at this in the long view. It's part of what makes them really unique and gives them all those winning seasons.
Yeah, and it looks like a very interesting draft. I think it's something, it's very telling. We've talked about it a lot on our program, made some of the very same points. It's great to have someone in your position that reaffirms some of the things that we have been speaking about. And I had actually kind of stole this from someone off of SiriusXM NFL radio earlier in the day, but they had mentioned the 2014 draft. It almost went kind of backwards. If you look at the top 5 quarterbacks, Blake Bortles goes number 1 overall, Johnny Manziel at 22, and then the Vikings jump back in to grab Teddy Bridgewater 32nd. You have Derek Carr going early in the second round and Jimmy Garoppolo late in the second round, and it almost, the terms of success there is completely flipped over. Whereas Jimmy Garoppolo, who's the 5th quarterback taken in that particular quarterback class, has had the most success. Derek Carr follows up, and therefore from there. And that one was kind of maybe not as defined also. You know, it was maybe surprising that Blake Bortles went 3rd overall. Do you kind of see this draft perhaps going in that kind of same direction where we may have a surprise that trickles into the second round? Because initially you had said maybe 1 or 2 in the first round, which would assume then some are coming off the board in the second round. However, we don't have an order for those top maybe 3, 4, or 5, do we?
So generally Pickett is the highest rated, but remember, and right after him, Malik Willis. Malik Willis is looked at as longer term, higher talent. Kenny Pickett is more ready. But they're both really good prospects. Let me take you back to 1999. That was a draft that had like 6 quarterbacks in the first round. So the first pick by Cleveland was Tim Couch, washed out of football. The 3rd pick was Akili Smith with the Bengals, washed out of football. Donovan McNabb had a good career. Then you get to the Chicago Bears, who picked Cade McNown, washed out of football. Now, they can't have all been terrible draft picks. Scouting's too good for that. So much will go into the care and feeding of these quarterbacks. Who's the quarterback coach? How good's the offensive line? How much simple will they make the offense and all the rest of it? Because they can't all have both of those. There are 4 or 5 quarterbacks and many more that could be big stars in this draft. It just depends how it works out over time. And I mean, look at some of the first picks overall in the draft. Look at the quarterback the Raiders picked many years ago, who didn't at the top of the first round, who didn't go anywhere. It can be a little bit hit and miss. And for a general manager, probably not too many fans really know the subtleties and difference of left tackle play, except for a sack, or a holding penalty. But everybody's got an opinion about how the quarterback's playing. So it's a high risk, high reward pick for someone in management. In other words, the general manager that picked that had Cleveland's first pick and picked Baker Mayfield is no longer there.
Yeah, I totally agree. And as you mentioned, it's definitely a quarterback-driven league, passing league. And I guess I have just maybe one final question to toss your way, if you can. You mentioned draft night, and you mentioned how seconds turn into minutes and minutes turn into hours. And just kind of explain what that might be like for some of the young men that are going to be there, because there's many that are invited that are going to be in the green room. I've been mentioning a lot recently, Gino Smith. And there was another draft where EJ Manuel was the only first round quarterback because Buffalo had a definite need, but most other teams kind of just stayed away. And to much his credit, Gino Smith stuck around, even though he's in the second round, and still got announced onto the stage. But just what kind of pressure is that like on these young men? Most people forget these are young men in their early 20s coming out of college.
Well, imagine in the green room, if you're at the draft, there are like 6-8 people around the table. You're in the same space as the other 25, 30 people they invited. So it's not like this private, intimate moment. They have the hot lights and boom mics on. And it's one of the reasons that people stay home and do a draft party at home, because they can have so many more people than can fit in that room. They're not under the hot lights every second. And what happens with it could be Gino Smith or Brady Quinn or Aaron Rodgers, any of these players that slip beyond where the prognosticators, the Mel Kipers or Todd McShay, have them rated. It now becomes a big story on ESPN, the plummeting draft pick. And I remember Brady Quinn changing. First, he had a full 3-piece suit on, and that went off. And then the coat went off, and then the vest went off, and then the tie went off as time went on. And your heart went out to him. So, for example, Mahomes had a draft party back in his home of Tyler, Texas. He could have everybody he wanted there. But, if he went down to number 20, they were not going to turn it into a big defeat. Oh, my gosh, this player was picked to go number 6, but he went 15. It still means you're the 15th best player in the country, and you're going to sign a great contract. So, there's notwithstanding whether you go where you're projected, you're still going to have a great future.
Yeah. And to your credit, we had one of your agents on not too long ago, Derek Hockridge. And so he spoke a lot about how, Steinberg Sports gets these young men prepared for the draft, and much to the credit to you and your agency there. For what you've done over all of these various many years, and congratulations on yet another, I'm going to assume, a successful NFL draft when it's all said and done. Any big plans for the draft weekend here?
No, I'd probably be at a player's house and supporting them, and you hope things go well, but occasionally, because what happens is teams are pretty open about who they really take. And the draft consists of teams that are passionate about this player. Those are the teams that will draft you. So if you have good relationships with teams, you have that information, and you can prepare a player well for the fact that, yes, there are 32 teams, but these 3 seem to be places that that you can go.
Yes. Well, we are up against it. Ladies and gentlemen, Leigh Steinberg, premier sports agent, CEO of Leigh Steinberg Sports and Entertainment Holdings. Leigh, thank you for letting me address you by your first name, Mr. Steinberg. I know many people would say, oh, well, that's my father, but truly, truly grateful and appreciate you coming on to our show.
Okay. Glad to be here. Good luck to you.
Thank you, sir. And that'll do it for us, folks. As we always sign off here at the end of our program, my name is Joe Kuzma, and that was Leigh Steinberg, once again, of Leigh Steinberg Sports and Entertainment Holdings. Until next time, happy NFL draft, everyone. We've got more coming to you, believe it or not. So until then, we encourage everyone out there to be safe, be good, and we'll catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.